Senator Brannigan, Representative Perry, and members of the committee. My name is Martin Blank. I'm a professor of physiology and cellular biophysics at Columbia University. And I've actually had extensive experience in industry doing research there. I've worked for the government. And I also have consulted for government groups. I was called down to Brazil to testify before the Chamber of Deputies there on this a related problem. It was a power line problem. What I want to speak to you about mainly is the biology, since that is really my specialty, and I think that's probably the strongest point that one can make. And can you move that along to the third one? Move it along, please. One more. One more. One of the things that I can tell you about is that we can hear all kinds of things about cell phone studies, epidemiology studies, but one of the things I do is I ask cells what they think. And I speak cell language, the language that cells reply to when you ask them the question. And you can ask them the question very simply. You do something bad to them, and they suddenly do something that they do when it is bad. You raise the temperature, they start making stress proteins. You introduce acid, they'll make stress proteins. You introduce alcohol, they'll make stress proteins. You introduce EMF, they make stress proteins. That's as clear an answer as one can get from a living cell. That this is what the cell perceives as something that's potentially harmful. Now, one of the things that we have done in our studies is to pursue this line of research and actually find out what it is in the DNA that is responding to this kind of signal. We have taken a piece of the DNA out and been able to transplant the DNA into another piece of DNA and gotten that other piece of DNA to respond. We've been able to stimulate luciferase. So in other words, we've got a piece of DNA that can respond to EMF. So we know that this piece of DNA can respond. And this piece of DNA may be a little different in certain respects. There are certain special bases that are in there, but the DNA is there and it responds. There's no question in my mind that we understand that DNA is vulnerable to these kinds of fields. It's vulnerable to the lower frequency fields, it's vulnerable to the radio frequency fields, and we certainly know that it's vulnerable to the high frequency fields. You had asked earlier about a more general EMF problem. We know that ultraviolet causes cancer by acting on the DNA. We know that X-rays cause cancer. EMF is that kind of an agent. The shocking thing is that it doesn't take very much, because we believe, and our experiments have been showing that the EMF acts at the level of the DNA, because the DNA, the bases in the DNA are chemicals that have electronic clouds on both sides of the bases. In fact, these electrons that are sitting there are very easily moved because people have moved them. There's a whole group down in California who've been studying this thing, have many papers on this, and they can show that the electrons can be made to move. And you know, it's like Murphy's Law says, if things can happen, they will happen. And I think that's really what happens. So we have a plausible mechanism. When people say they don't understand how it can happen, we can propose something. We can't prove it, but proof is a very peculiar kind of concept in science. You never really prove. Newton's laws weren't proved, and when they were proved, they turned out to be not quite correct, as Einstein showed. So science is an ongoing thing. The question is, where do you want to place your bets? No question in my mind, no question in the literature, that the bets are very clear. There's very strong evidence that we understand that EMF can interact with cell phones. And I think there's an opportunity for the Maine legislature to do something to alert people to the potential danger. Just like cells respond with their stress proteins, we can get people to read this and say, perhaps I should distance myself from this device. Not I should throw it out. I want to use it. If there's an emergency, I want to be able to contact somebody. We've learned to live with things that are dangerous. There are over 30,000 fatalities on the road every year, and we live with cars. We love our cars, no question about that. But we put in seat belts, we inspect our cars, we license our drivers, all kinds of limitations on driving a car. To put a label on is not a limitation. It's a warning. It's telling people they should be educated. They should understand what's going on there, and they should act accordingly, act intelligently. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Blank. Questions? Representative Campbell.
Thank you, Senator. Okay, you mentioned California. You from California?
No, I'm from New York.
Well, you mentioned California. Some people are from California. Is this law in California? Do you have to have a sticker on the cell phone in California?
I don't think so.
Thank you.
It's not anywhere.
Could I just make one further comment?
Sure.
When Professor Gandhi was presenting, his last slide was sort of cut off. When you asked about the corporate group,
Sorry.
He actually was presenting an opinion by probably the highest authority in Great Britain. It was the Stewart Committee. They actually issued a report in 2001, and then subsequently, I think it was back in 2008, where they said more or less the same thing that we've been saying, that there's every evidence to indicate that children are at risk and they should be told to limit their usage of this thing.
Thank you very much. We're going to interrupt. We have a sponsor who has asked to.
He has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Professor. Representative Lewin.
Thank you, Senator. Professor, are you familiar with this book?
No, I mean, I think I actually have it in my pack, but I haven't looked at it.
Well, while we're having testimony, when someone's familiar with this book, I'd like to ask them a question. Thanks.
Thank you. Representative Gill.